EPC clerk, are you ready to begin? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission meeting of February 21st, 2024. I call the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item and turn them into the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subjected to disruptive, racist verbal attacks by anonymous callers during virtual public comments. The City of Mountain View is fully committed to racial, religious, and cultural equity and justice as we strive to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive community for all. This commission welcomes respectful and non-threatening public comments regarding matters over which the EPC has jurisdiction. Comments deemed otherwise, pursuant to the Council Code of Conduct and the Government Code, may be grounds for immediately terminating a speaker's comment period. Now, I will ask the EPC clerk to proceed with roll call.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Cranston?
Here.
Commissioner Donahue?
Here.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Gutierrez, present.
Commissioner Nunez?
Here.
Vice Chair Dempsey?
Here.
Chair Yin?
Here. Thank you very much.
All commissioners are present at tonight's meeting.
With roll call complete, we will move on to agenda item 3.1, the minutes approval of Environmental Planning Commission meeting minutes of August 16th, 2023. I'm going to open it up for discussion if there is any. Seeing no discussion, we'll move on to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on the minutes, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on the minutes, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
We do not have any speakers on Zoom.
Okay, and no yellow cards for public comment, I take it. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do they need to read it fully? Okay. Commissioner Gutierrez, do you mind reading the entire motion?
Motion to approve the Environmental Planning Commission meeting minutes of August 16th, 2023.
Thank you very much. We will now take a vote.
Sorry, just to
The
clarify the
motion-
record, to clarify the record on who the motion and who the seconder was.
Sure. I see on the computer the motioner was Chris Clark. I didn't see that at the time, and Commissioner Gutierrez had motioned it.
Push the
So
button. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed it.
that's okay.
And the seconder was Vice Chair Dempsey, correct?
Thank you for the clarification.
Go ahead.
The
Okay.
motion passes with 6 approved and 1 abstained votes.
Thank you very much. Now we'll open oral communications. Agenda 4. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, do we have any yellow cards or speakers online?
We don't have any speaker cards for those online.
Thank you so much. We'll move to item 5.1. We'll open the public hearing, Housing Element Annual Report and Emergency Shelters Amendment. We have a commissioner who needs to recuse themselves from participation for a portion of this agenda item due to a conflict of interest. Thank you for the lights. And we'll proceed in a slightly different manner. We will first have a staff presentation followed by public comment for the entire agenda item. At the close of public comment, the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote on the matters that the commissioner needed to recuse themselves for. And then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote on the remaining items after the commissioner returns. And I will clarify more on which portions at the close of public comment. So if we could have the staff presentation from Senior Planner Krisha Penalar and Advanced Planning Manager Eric Anderson, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Krisha Penalar, Senior Planner, and I'm joined with Eric Anderson, Advanced Planning Manager. We're here to present the 2023 Annual Progress Report and Emergency Shelter Amendments. At today's meeting, we'll focus on 2 items. The first is the Annual Progress Report to provide an update on the progress on the 6th Cycle Housing Element Program and Regional Housing Needs Assessment Allocation. This is required by the state's Department of Housing and Community Development and must be completed by April 1st. The report tracks all phases of development, including application submittal, entitlement, building permit issuance, and certificate of occupancy. It also tracks policy and program implementation for the 2023 period. Please note, key changes to the report include reporting on number of units for RHNA allocation. For AB 1783, cities report on all new units as part of their RHNA allocation instead of net new units, which is new units minus demoed units. The second item before EPC are the Code and Precise Plan amendments for emergency shelters, which was identified as a housing element implementation program. State law, AB 2339, requires cities to designate one zoning district in which emergency shelters are permitted by right. State law also requires cities to do a site analysis to ensure there are sufficient sites in the zoning district that permit emergency shelters by right to house the city's unhoused populations. Furthermore, the Housing Element Program identified the El Camino Real Precise Plan as a zoning district to permit emergency shelters. So the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA for short, is a requirement by state law in which local jurisdictions are required to provide their share of new housing units through zoning of adequate land to build these units and to implement other housing element requirements to facilitate housing production. The table here shows the City of Mountain View's RHNA allocation of 11,135 units, a substantial increase from the 5th cycle's requirement of 2,926 units. This table shows the first year progress towards meeting the RHNA goal with the building permits issued from January 31st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. Projects receiving building permits after June 30th, 2022 to January 31st, 2023, known as the projection period, also contribute to the 6th cycle RHNA. Please note, staff is working with HCD to revise the projection period unit count, as the projection period accounts net new units when it should account for all new units per state law. Staff will have this table updated prior to council. So several housing element programs have been completed or are ongoing. These include updates to the zoning ordinance to facilitate different residential land uses. Gatekeeper applications are now being accepted between March 1st, 2024 and June 28th, 2024, with a council authorization hearing in the fall, which will satisfy the program deadline in the housing element. Ongoing monitoring for no net loss to ensure there's adequate land available to meet the city's RENA allocation. Ongoing outreach to tenants and property owners regarding tenant rights are also occurring. And a tenant displacement response strategy study session was held to discuss local replacement requirements. Additional housing element program successes include the following items. The city has funded 199 permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing units and 100 interim housing units. The city has also received multiple grants and funding to support subsidized housing, and additional funds have been provided to support other agencies, such as CSA with homeless prevention and outreach. As background, state law requires cities to identify one or more zoning districts where emergency shelters are permitted by right without a discretionary permit. Non-discretionary permits are not subject to CEQA. Emergency shelters are only required to meet the development standards listed in the government code. And lastly, state law requires that cities must identify potential sites in the zoning district in which emergency shelters are permitted by right to meet the city's projected demand of unhoused populations. Per state law, Mountain View is required to provide at least 6,400 square feet of land area to accommodate 32 beds. Therefore, the city must identify a zoning district to permit emergency shelters by right and conduct a site analysis to ensure there are viable sites to meet these requirements. In response to these requirements, the city's adopted housing element program includes an implementation item that directs staff to amend a zoning designation to be consistent with AB 2339 by March 31st, 2024, and also identifies El Camino Real Precise Plan as the zoning for emergency shelters. This program goes beyond the minimum requirements of AB 2339. Staff has conducted a review of the entirety of El Camino Real Precise Plan using ABAG site analysis methodology, which is based on site vacancy, location of goods and services, and likelihood of the site turning over in the future. The map here shows the El Camino Real Precise Plan and the number of potentially viable sites for an emergency shelter by sub-area. Staff has identified a total of 4 viable sites along the El Camino Real corridor, with 2 in the Castro Miramonte sub-area 1, 1 in the Castro Miramonte sub-area 2, and 1 in the medium intensity corridor. As indicated prior, staff has identified 2 sites in the Castro Miramonte sub-area 1 that have sufficient land area to meet the requirements of state law. These sites include 836 West El Camino Real and 1098 West El Camino Real. Both sites exceed the 6,400 square feet lot area requirement of AB 2339 and have characteristics that demonstrate a higher likelihood of redevelopment in the housing element planning period, such as existing use, age, structure size, and vacancy levels. Please note, these identified sites are not proposed emergency shelter sites. No project is proposed at this time. The city did reach out to the property owners to notify them of these proposed amendments and that their properties were used as part of the required emergency shelter site analysis. After the adoption of the housing element, staff conducted a reconnaissance survey of potential historic resources as part of the council priority work to update the historic preservation ordinance and register. During this process, 8 sites of the El Camino Real were identified as potential historic sites. 1 site is a known historic site at the state and national level with an active development project under review. However, additional analysis must be conducted over the next month to determine if the others meet the historic resource criteria. If the entire El Camino Real Precise Plan was modified to allow emergency shelters by right, state law would not allow discretionary permits, including consideration of potentially historic resources. Therefore, a potential competing interest between the council priority surrounding protection of historic resources and the housing element program to allow emergency shelters by right within the El Camino Real Precise Plan now exists. In response, staff is proposing a phased approach that could help meet the housing element deadline, meet the minimum requirements of AB 2339, and allow time to complete the historic analysis so council is fully informed before making further zoning changes. This phased approach that staff recommends is to rezone the Castro Miramonte Subarea 1 to allow emergency shelters by right, complete the historic resource analysis, and then return to council after the analysis is complete, so council may make a fully informed decision about whether to zone other subareas within the El Camino Real Precise Plan or the entire El Camino Real Precise Plan to permit emergency shelters by right. Given there are sufficient sites in the Castro Miramonte Subarea 1 to meet the minimum land requirement per state law, and the fact there are no historic sites in this subarea, staff proposes amending the Castro Miramonte Subarea 1 to permit emergency shelters, and the other areas would be provisionally permitted. However, EPC can recommend for council to amend all of El Camino Real Precise Plan to permit emergency shelters by right now, but additional research is needed to understand the CEQA path. Please note, it may require CEQA or could be an exemption, but this is something staff needs to study further. If EPC wishes to recommend that council amend all of El Camino Real Precise Plan to permit emergency shelters by right now, staff will take this recommendation to City Council and work with the City Attorney's Office to resolve the CEQA question prior this matter being considered by City Council, so Council may decide at that time whether to proceed with a full amendment. Lastly, staff has received comments from members of the public expressing concerns that the recommendation to require a CUP for emergency shelters in the General Industrial zoning district is illegal and or inconsistent with the city's adopted housing element. These concerns have been brought to the attention of the City Attorney's Office, and CD staff is working with legal counsel to determine if the addition of a CUP requirement would be illegal or inconsistent with the housing element. Given the public's concern and the need to confer with legal counsel, staff is withdrawing its recommendation to require a CUP for emergency shelters in the General Industrial zoning district at this time. For purpose of this evening's discussion, the withdrawal of this recommendation does not mean that the Commission cannot discuss and provide a recommendation with regard to this matter. You may, by majority vote, provide a recommendation on whether to include a CUP requirement for emergency shelters in the zoning district, and staff will share that recommendation with City Council when this matter goes to Council in March. If the Commission, by majority vote, recommends including a CUP requirement for emergency shelters in the zoning district, City staff and legal counsel would endeavor to resolve the legal concerns prior to the City Council meeting in March, so that Council may make fully informed decision on whether to include a CUP requirement for emergency shelters in the zoning district. AB 2339 also prohibits the city from imposing standards that are not prescribed by state law. These standards are shown on the screen, and proposed code amendments would ensure compliance with state law. These include removal or updates of existing standards. For example, we cannot impose underlying development standards or common facilities. The city must also modify the parking standard to only require up to 1 parking space per employee. Staff also proposes clearer standards to the size of waiting and intake areas, minimum lighting requirements, and the hours and location of on-site security. In terms of next steps, the Code and Precise Plan amendments are tentatively scheduled for the Airport Land Use Commission on February 28th, as a new residential land use is proposed in the Moffett Airfield Comprehensive Land Use Plan. The City Council will review the Code and Precise Plan amendments for consideration of adoption, and the 2023 Annual Housing Report, which will be forwarded to the Department of Housing, Community Development, and OPR before April 1st. Overall, staff recommends the EPC recommend a finding that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA if the staff recommendation is supported, and recommends that EPC recommend approval of the Code and Precise Plan amendments with 1 modification to Exhibit 2. Staff recommends that EPC remove the proposed amendments to Section 36.20.05. This new recommendation would preserve the current permitting process in the zoning district, allowing emergency shelters and low barrier navigation centers by right, instead of the published draft, which would have required a conditional use permit. Staff also recommends that EPC forward the APR to City Council consideration. Thank you for your time, and please note staff is available for any questions.
Thank you very much. At this point, we're going to move to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. I see we have. Yep. Well, hold on. The clerk will.
Yeah, so the next speaker is Alex, and Jackie will be the following speaker. Oh, okay. So the next speaker is Jackie, and the following speaker will be Anne.
Okay, and how much time? 3 minutes? Oh.
Oh, the button in the front. You're good. Okay. My name is Jackie Cash, and I'm a long-term resident of Mountain View. Several years ago, I was displaced from the apartment building I was living in, and now I have ended up living in the Life Move shelter at Leghorn, an indirect result of that displacement because of the increase in rent I faced when I was forced out. One of the things I would like council as well as EPC to keep in mind when determining locations for these emergency shelters. Leghorn is very isolated from everything. We're in the far edge of an industrial area. We have no access to grocery stores, no access to parks. The nearest VTA station is a 2-block walk away, which is really difficult for all our residents who are over 60 and have walkers and everything else. As of now, although this is something I'm working on with some of the council members, even the city shuttle doesn't come there. I mean, we're literally just in the middle of nowhere. Some of us have cars. We try to help out the ones who don't. When you are picking an area or evaluating the areas, these are things that really need to be kept in mind, that even in a temporary type setting, people need access to a means to get to the store, to get to the pharmacy, to get to the doctor's office, to get to a job interview, and everything else. I have seen on Nextdoor the uprising over the prospect of these shelters being placed in the Castro and Miramonte area. There are already people who are ready to vote city council out of office, and they haven't even seen any of this yet. So you're going to have a hard time no matter what you do, but I do ask that you keep in mind that we all feel so isolated because of where we are, and you can't keep isolating people. There are homeless people in Mountain View, and they are not going to go away. And most of us would prefer not to be homeless, but if we don't have access to the things we need, we're going to stay that way. So just when you're selecting, just remember that putting us out in an industrial area doesn't do any good. You can hide people, but you can't make them go away. So I'd appreciate just that being kept in mind. Thank you.
The next speaker is Anne, and the following speaker will be Saloon.
Hi, my name is Anne McLaughlin. I'm also a long-term resident of Mountain View. So this was a really interesting presentation. There's a lot that goes into making these decisions. As a resident, I felt like it raised a lot of questions about the process that I didn't feel were really addressed in the presentation, like what other zones might have been considered. It sounds like we only looked at this particular zone, and it sounds like there's a requirement from the state that we identify one. I certainly, as a longtime resident, have concerns about things that don't require CEQA. So something that's by right, and I may be using this term incorrectly, is of some concern who lives in the neighborhood, because I know that when other issues have come in front of council, looking at impact on parking and traffic, and I don't see any of that raised in these reports as to how those might be impacted. But if I understand what you just presented, the minute it's approved, these are not questions we can ask. And I don't think that those kinds of questions have been answered in this particular presentation. So those are my first comments. I'm not sure how well the neighborhoods are aware of kind of this process. I know that you've done outreach, but I don't think that we've seen the kind of reporting on it or really notification of neighbors. I mean, the minute you fall out of 750 feet, you aren't notified, which is of some concern to me. But thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Salim, and the following is Alex.
Your mic.
It's good? Okay. Hi, commissioners. I first want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and also I want to thank you for all the work that you put into the housing element, which was incredible because you knew it was a binding document at the time. It's not so clear now whether it's a binding document. This is clearly a reneging, a bad faith reneging of program 1.1.f. I'll read you the text of the housing element. This was a housing element that HCD views as a contract with the state. The housing element reads, program 1.1 will amend the El Camino Real Precise Plan, allowing emergency shelters without a conditional use permit. That text says nothing about a sub-area of a sub-zone of the Precise Plan. This proposal reduces the scope of by right emergency shelters by 95.4%. If this wasn't illegal, it would obviously be plainly immoral and worth rejecting on policy grounds. How are we even asking the question whether it should be legal to build shelters for the homeless? How are we asking that question? All of you know how bad homelessness is. You only have to walk on Castro to see that people are still sleeping on the streets. And instead of thinking that that's a priority, we're saying that what's actually a priority are dubiously historical buildings on El Camino Real that are so dubiously historical we haven't even identified them yet. I think we need to get our priorities straight. We need to prioritize homelessness and actually allow shelters for the homeless to be legal to build, instead of saying, well, maybe they're something that we're okay with. You know, if you're willing to put up with 6 months of delay, an EIR that'll cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially give neighbors a litigation route to stop a shelter from being built. What kind of city is this? I'm very disappointed by this staff report. I don't understand what the point of the housing element update was if we're not going to think that the programs in it are binding, if we're going to rewrite history and rewrite programs that are in dry ink. I know that HCD will be informed about this, as well as other attempts to renege on housing element programs. This is not just a liability for a housing element compliance, but it's also a liability for whether we retain a pro-housing designation, which is something that the state can take away if it thinks that the city has been dishonest about its commitments on homelessness. I appreciate the update on the MM zone. I hope there will be an equivalent update on the rest of the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Alex, and the following is a virtual speaker.
Yeah. Salim is a tough act to follow. Hi, friends. Welcome, Paul. How's it going? Okay, so glad to hear that staff is consulting counsel. So I'm just going to give my comments that I had before that anyway, because it's more fun and I already have them written down. So imagine you're lucky enough to have a nice little cabin somewhere, and you tell a friend that they can use it to get away for the weekend. But then when they get there, you say you're concerned about the furniture and the plumbing. So they can stay in the closet downstairs, but if they ask really nicely, they can use some other rooms in that house. The proposed interpretation of program 1.1.f jeopardizes the housing element as a whole and feels like a bad faith post hoc renegotiation with both the community and HCD. Making it right would be very easy. It's as simple as removing the other land use requirements addition and the PUPs from table 1. So pretty easy fix that you guys, I think, could still probably recommend tonight as commissioners, given that it is something that's pending before it goes to council. This will also fix the issue with 860 Bay Street not qualifying for site analysis. I personally would like to see the analysis performed on all 4 of the possible sites before it gets brought to council, just so that they have the full breadth of options given to them for their analysis instead of just the 2 that were in the staff report. Thanks.
Thank you. On to the virtual public speakers.
Next speaker is Louise. Give us a moment as we figure out how to unmute the speaker.
Thank you very much. Am I in audio now?
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, I wanted to agree with the prior speaker about the 750-foot notice. We've said many times how inadequate and ridiculous it is. 750 feet, for example, from the Jiffy Lube site, I think, what would that be, like Baskin Robbins and McKelvey baseball field. So again, this is not the way the city should be run on these kinds of important and permanent choices that all the residents need to know about. And I would urge the city, the EPC, to advise the council that needs to be changed. I'm very concerned about, do we really know what it is we're voting for? The emergency shelters obviously are of great necessity for our city and our society. But the efforts by Sacramento to strip away local control leaves us with questions that we have no transparency to obtain answers, such as exactly who is going to be in these shelters, who's making the referrals, how long will they stay? If there's supposed to be limitations up to, say, 6 months, can there be repeat usage such that it becomes permanent? An emergency can get you in, but what gets you out? And who exactly will be there? What will the rules be? When we have zoning for liquor stores or bars or restaurants, car repairs, the neighbors know exactly what they're going to have. There'll be noise. There'll be places open till 2 a.m. There'll be trucks delivering food. But we know nothing about how these shelters will be run, who the contractors will be. And the primary question, I think, is, since Sacramento doesn't want us to have any local control, they only want us to count beds, how are we going to prioritize families? No children should be sleeping in cars, but can we make families a top priority? We were told when they were working on the housing for the 812, the parking lot that will be housing by the library, we cannot prioritize even local residents that have been displaced. So I urge the EPC to not go forward with this process until we are allowed to have, as a city, to plan for how the shelter will benefit those most in need, and with who we will have living near our schools and our parks. Will it be drug-free? Are there ways for people to be evicted? Or are they immune from many of the laws and rules that govern all sorts of other businesses? So again, the lack of transparency, lack of information. Zoning for a shelter is just not the same as zoning for a restaurant or a school or a townhouse. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers, EPC clerk?
no other speakers.
Okay, thanks. I will now bring the item back for the commission questions and deliberation on staff recommendations 2 and 3 regarding zoning ordinance amendments to develop standards and permitting process for emergency shelters and amendments of the El Camino Real precise plan to add emergency shelters as a permitted use. We'll have the commissioner who needs to recuse himself go ahead and do so, and then we will continue participation on discussion after.
Okay. So I'm recusing myself from discussion of recommendation numbers 2 and 3 of this item regarding the zoning ordinance amendments to develop standards and permitting process for emergency shelters and amendments of the El Camino Real Precise Plan to add emergency shelters as a permitted use due to the proximity of my personal residence to El Camino Real Precise Plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And after Commissioner Clark exits, we will then move on to EPC questions on these 2 items and then deliberation, and we'll take a vote on this portion of the agenda item. So I'm going to open up the question session. Go ahead, Commissioner Nunes.
I guess I'll go for it now. Quick questions. So when we were going through the housing element process, I just wanted to make sure I confirmed my understanding of the view that HCD and the state and state law has with regards to the document that we've produced. I just want to confirm to the extent possible what was shared with us, again, as far as my understanding through that process. Yes or no, does HCD and or the state of California, by way of HCD, view the housing element as a legally binding document from the city of Mountain View?
I would say that from a kind of an analogy perspective, it is something of a contract with the city. I would not say that it is in all ways the same as a legally binding document, the way other contracts might be a legally binding document. It is a policy document. It's intended to be high level, and because it's a policy document that's intended to be high level, there has to be some decision making that happens as you implement the policy document. Okay. HCD recognizes that, and I think of course it is with HCD's new kind of enforcement programs, we are kind of in a new world. And so we don't know right now the extent to which they are going to enforce different interpretations of the document. But it is a policy document that we have to adhere to.
That we have to adhere to. Cool. So just based on that response and I'm pretty sure our awareness with regards to the higher degree of attention and desire of enforcement from HCD, that's closer to a yes than a no, correct? That would be closer to yes than to no, because I asked a yes or no question, and it sounds like a yes or no question is not necessarily possible, but just based on what I heard, it's closer to a yes than a no.
I would say there are a lot of aspects of your question that are correct.
Okay.
That we are expected by HCD to adhere to our policy document.
Okay, thank you very much.
No other questions? Commissioner Cranston?
I have a bunch. So the staff report on the slides on page 11, it says that if we were to recommend proceeding with Olivella Camino RER, that we would need to determine CEQA. The housing element included an EIR, including a CEQA review. So why would doing something that was already reviewed require another CEQA review?
I'll let the Assistant Community Development Director respond to this.
Good. Is it good? Hi, good evening. Amber Blazinski, Assistant Community Development Director. So the EIR for the housing element, it does analyze cultural resources, but it doesn't actually analyze specific sites or specific cultural resources. Instead, it offers mitigation measures that then cover those when you do subsequent review. So what it says is that this EIR for this project, the housing element, is not contemplating removing any cultural resources. And so therefore, there's no impact to cultural resources. And then one of the mitigation measures in the housing element goes into detail in that if we do discover by analysis that there is a historic resource on one of the sites, that it would be the housing element mitigation measure states that you would not disturb or demolish that resource. So if then you knew that you were going to demolish or remove that resource, you would ultimately do further, like a subsequent supplemental EIR to then analyze that resource fully.
And at this point, nothing along El Camino Real at this point has been designated as a historic resource?
Yeah, there is one site, 749 West El Camino Real. It is a development project site. We're currently doing a supplemental EIR for that site.
And you said cultural resources. I think of cultural resources as like Indian burial grounds.
It's
not old buildings.
Yeah, that's what it falls under in an EIR. That's the name of the section. Okay.
Second question. Why, no matter what we do, why is the proposal in there to remove the permitted use in the MM zone? What's the basis for doing that? That was never discussed in the housing element, and I don't understand why that's even included.
It was included because the MM zone update. So 12 years ago, when we adopted the MM zone as a zoning district for the El Camino Real for emergency shelters, let's see. I guess the best way to say this is that we are adding broader language in the. Excuse me. Let me collect my thoughts here. I guess I'll just say that it was a conservative approach to ensure that historic resources are protected. All historic resources that have been identified have the opportunity to be protected. There are, given that the given that the only known historic resource in the MM zoning district currently has a development proposal adjacent to it that's currently under review, that site may be of less concern. And so if the commission wants to still have that additional check on protecting that historic resource for in case an emergency shelter is proposed there, then the commission can leave that CUP requirement in. But otherwise, since it's the only historic resource, that one property, it may not be necessary to leave it as a CUP.
And the removal, the change of use in other sub-areas from permitted to requiring a provisional use permit, why is that included?
That's included because, well, there's two reasons. One is, as the staff report mentioned, there's a conflict with other council priorities, as well as needing to determine the proper CEQA path. So we, our initial analysis was that if there is the potential for this project to, for this zoning action to impact historic resources, that requires a particular CEQA path. We're looking at other options now where it might not.
Misunderstood my question.
Yeah.
So the Life Move site is an area that the site was a permitted use. The other changes in the other areas would now make this requiring a provisional use permit. That's what I'm talking. I'm not talking about historical at this point. There are emergency shelters are permitted in other areas of the city beyond El Camino today, and you're proposing changing that from a permitted use to a conditional use. Why?
The only area where we had initially proposed that was MM.
Okay, so no other areas.
No other
would be
areas.
affected.
Yeah.
If another light moves came on, it could go into that same location, whether it's a good location or not.
Well, so there are lots of other areas in the city where emergency shelters are conditional. There are lots of other areas in the city where emergency shelters are conditional, and we are not proposing to change that.
The 1.1.f, whatever it is, that was disclosed as part of the housing element process and made public, so anybody in the community could review that during the housing element process?
Yes.
That was not a new requirement that's been snuck here into the last minute?
No, it was certainly public during the review of the, I'm sorry, I think I have to let.
Yeah, sorry about that. So just a clarification, we will need another commissioner who might have to recuse from this item. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay.
And just so that everyone knows, I brought this up to the attention of our team because of where I live. And I mentioned to them, hey, I'm on El Camino. I don't think I should be here. I am recusing myself from discussion of recommendation numbers 2 and 3 regarding the zoning ordinance amendments to development standards and permitting process for emergency shelters and amendments of the El Camino Real Precise Plan to add emergency shelters as a permitted use due to proximity of my personal residence to El Camino Real Precise Plan.
Okay, thank you. We will see you later.
So what I'm attempting to make sure that I understand is it's been suggested by members of the public that this has not been something that was out there for people to review and understand. And to my knowledge, this was included in every phase of the housing element review process. It was publicly noticed and made available for people to see. It stated right up front that El Camino Precise Plan would be part of this, and therefore it's my belief that this is not something new, that community has had an opportunity to review this through the housing element process. Is that correct?
I believe that this language was put in probably in the last 6 months or so of the housing element process.
Okay. But it was out there, it was available for people to see.
Yes.
Okay. When the council was reviewing the historical ordinance, was there any discussion whatsoever about going back and how that might affect already put in place agreements with the state? Did they state that they want to go back and look at, would they want to change something in the housing element?
No, that did not come up during the historic discussion.
Okay. This is a requirement that came up after the housing element was approved through the historical process, the historic review process.
So that we conducted this reconnaissance survey after the housing element was approved.
Okay. Next question. And this is kind of a question, I don't know whether this is, I had some questions about the objective standards for the emergency shelters. ECR has a level of density, and one of the comments in the staff report was that emergency shelters would be limited to 1 to 2 stories. ECR is not limited to 1 to 2 stories. I thought SB 330 prohibited anything that would actually potentially result in the reduction in density in an area. Are emergency shelters different from other items in the precise plans?
No, we would not apply that as a development standard to emergency shelters. I think the comment was based on our experience with these types of state-funded projects. There's limited funding. And so generally these types of publicly funded projects are done with portables, are done with other types of very low-cost improvements, not tall buildings that need to be engineered and are very expensive to build. That is just a disclosure of our experience. It is not a development standard. It is not something that we are allowed by the state to regulate. We cannot regulate the height of emergency shelters.
So it would be no less than existing El Camino precise plan densities.
We cannot even limit the El Camino Real based on the El Camino Real heights.
Okay. I think that's all my questions for the moment.
Are there any other questions from other commissioners? Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have some basic structural questions that I wanted to ask, and I think maybe it would be helpful for some folks, and of course, definitely for me, to start with a sort of a basic characterization of what 2339 asks for. And so maybe I believe we have the city attorney on. Perhaps if she would be willing to give us and the public a quick recap of what it is that bill is asking for and the extent to which it takes, what control it allows to remain with the cities and what control it takes away. Because I think I've heard some things, I think there's some confusion about what we can and cannot control here, because we got to follow state law. So perhaps if the city attorney could give us all a very quick primer of what's required of us in 2339.
Thank you. This is the City Attorney, Jennifer Logue. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. It would be a lot easier for me if maybe you could be a little more specific in your question. I can't give an entire primer of AB 2339. If you are talking about in relation to emergency shelters, I could maybe give a little bit of discussion, but I think it would be a lot easier for me just to ask specific questions. I mean, it does have requirements in there with regard to, the development restrictions or lack thereof on emergency shelters, but a big picture explanation of what AB 2339 does I can't, I'm not prepared to give that tonight, but I'm happy to answer specific questions related to it.
Very fair. I didn't mean to suggest you had to give a book report on it. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I can just recap what was in the staff report and
sure.
what was in the presentation. AB 2339 requires the city, through their housing element, to identify sites in the city that are able to accommodate one or more emergency shelters that can adequately serve the city's unhoused population. Further, those sites need to already allow residential uses, and the city has to rezone those sites to allow emergency shelters by right. Lastly, the city cannot, not lastly, there's more. The city cannot require any discretionary permits. So we can't require historic preservation permits. We can't require development review permits for emergency shelters unless it's in a district where it's allowed with the conditional use permit. So the conditional use permit is the only permit, or a provisional use permit in the precise plan, is the only permit that can be, discretionary permit that can be applied to emergency shelters in the city. Lastly, it lays out a list of objective standards that are the only objective standards that the city can apply to emergency shelters.
That was perfect. Thank you. Some more basic questions, then I want to come back to 2339 in a second because I have a definitional question that's important. But baseline, I know this is a dumb question. Do we have emergency shelters operating in the city of Mountain View right now?
I'm going to defer to Wayne. I'm not sure how the sites that we have operating are categorized as that land use. I know our housing director, Wayne Chen, is here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So just starting with the Life Moves Mountain View project, that is considered interim housing and not operated as emergency shelters. One of the defining distinctions between interim housing is versus emergency shelters is just the length of stay. And emergency shelters have a maximum of a 90-day duration for anyone who is there. And so the interim housing at Life Moves Mountain View does not have that restriction, although the intent is to help folks transition to permanent housing, but there is flexibility in that. So that's the primary one that the housing department works with and coordinates on.
Okay, so we have some of those sort of medium-term housing options available, clearly not enough. But this is about the short-term emergency housing options, and we do not have anything like that operating currently in Mountain View. Right? Right.
Correct.
I'll assume that's correct. There was a question mark in there. Okay. Have there been any proposals for them? It seems like they are conditionally permitted in other parts of the city. Has anyone asked to build one in any other part of the city in the last, 5-10 years?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the nearest thing that we have is the cold weather shelter on Hope Street.
Okay. How many beds is that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up.
But not huge, I assume. Okay. So, but one of the things that I think is important here is this would be permitted, these types of shelters would be permitted in other parts of the city, but no one's been coming and asking. That's my understanding from what you're nodding your head, yes. So it's not as if these are being asked for and they're being turned away by the city. Okay, all right, that's important. Okay, coming back to 2339, I think for me, as a lawyer, I care a lot about definitions. And so I've asked this question before, and I think it's really, really important to hear the answer so everybody can hear it. So in 2339, the term of art that they use is identified zoning designation. That's, am I correct, right? Okay. So I didn't go through the housing code to check this, and I'm sure you would know better than me. Is a precise plan subzone of the type that's identified in the staff report, does that meet the definition of an identified zoning designation? And how do we know it does?
I do not know off the top of my head if the term zoning designation is formally defined in any of this legislation. It does not appear to. It did not appear to be in the legislation.
So this is not a term of art. This is just a free-floating word.
It is a term of art. I think the city attorney would like to say something.
Thank you. Yes. Jennifer Logue, city attorney. So I had the very same question, and I spent a large part of my day trying to find a definition to zoning designations. I can say with reasonable confidence that it is not defined anywhere near the sections that we are talking about. I had the identical question. So what I have come to is I'm assuming it's a term of art. I Googled it as a term of art, and all I could find was examples of what zoning designations are, and the most common being residential, industrial, and commercial. And so I can allow, Mr. Anderson can correct me, but I do think that there is lack of clarity, because the thing I was trying to resolve as I was trying to figure out what zoning designation means is, does that mean an entire zoning district? Does that mean a portion of it? Does that mean it? And I don't have an answer to that question, but I did spend several hours trying to get an answer. So I'm assuming you're going where I was going, and I'm sorry I can't answer it for you.
No, that's okay. I think that's actually really helpful, because that, I think, gets to why there's some confusion over whether this is good faith, bad faith. It sounds like there's some legitimate legal question, and this was, like poor drafting for Sacramento to come up with a new term that nobody knew what it meant. Given that it isn't entirely clear, that tells me that some level of caution is very much called for here. And I'm not counsel of the city or anything, but I guess I would humbly suggest that we reach out to HCD and see, how do they understand this? Because we want to be in a good cooperative relationship with them. That's what the whole housing element's for, and we want to stay on the right side of those guys. So my humble suggestion would be, we should get on the phone with HCD tomorrow and say, look, we don't know what this word means, and this word's real important to understanding what we're supposed to be doing here. Because otherwise there's going to be a lot of confusion, and there's just going to be a lot of confusion about it. We need to get that answered. It's fine. I think it's fine for it to not be clear here, but I think by the time it gets to council, there should be a good answer for that, because otherwise we're just sort of charging into the great unknown. Maybe I'll stop there for a second.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Donahue, you have some questions as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things I did was went and looked at the existing emergency shelter ordinance, and I went on the city's website, and I noticed that the text in the red line version in our packet doesn't match what's currently published on the city's website. So it appears as though there were some updates previously that haven't been reflected on the ordinance that's shown on the website. And then I also, for some reason, when I got sworn in, I went to the city clerk's office, and I noticed that they actually have a physical copy of the zoning ordinance in a binder there. I went there this morning, and it looks like that's like 20 years out of date. So something needs to be done about that, I think.
Yeah, and I can provide clarity as to the mismatch. So we actually did make a set of code amendments in January 23rd, 2024, that are effective in February 22. So it just takes some time for the city website to be up to date.
Okay, great. Things move fast around here. Okay, great, thanks. The other questions I have are kind of dovetailing on some of the previous questions. The Hope and Mercy cold weather shelter is not considered an emergency shelter, even though it does seem like it's, at least for the portions of the time when it's open, it's that the kind of the emergency status, not for longer stays.
It's not a year-round emergency shelter, which is, I believe, specifically mentioned in AB 2339.
Okay, good. Okay, good to know. The other thing is on this, the 1.1F thing, concerns that have been raised. Is the intention, I think I heard earlier that there is an intention to do this now and then to continue to look into the rest of the precise plan and to actually, so it's more of a phased approach, is that the idea?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. We are bringing forward what we know can be approved now. We are going to do more analysis. And if, as the presenter said, the commission wants to recommend just rezoning all of El Camino right now, we will look into the CEQA process of that. We have some questions about the CEQA process. We'll see if there are any exemptions. But our phased approach will continue the analysis of the historic sites that have been flagged, and then bring back options for updating the whole precise plan later on that considers these, in a way that can consider these any historic sites that are deemed actually historic.
What's the deadline for under this law to take action to have the 6,400 square feet that we need to have?
So AB 2339 gives a 1-year deadline from adoption of the housing element. However, we are actually carrying this out pursuant to our housing element language itself, which has a deadline of March 31st.
Okay, so basically we have to do something by March 31st. Mm-hmm. We can't, it sounds like we don't have enough information or something to do the full thing that eventually we want to do. So we're doing this thing to meet a deadline, but then it'll be phased.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's my questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just jump in there with a question. Thank you, because it's tying into what you just asked, and that was the timing. So if we said that in our housing element that El Camino Precise Plan will be looked at for emergency shelters, the timing of that is also by the end of the cycle. It should be done.
By March 31st this year.
So when you mentioned the phasing and looking at it, then
once we go into this phasing process, it would be up to City Council when they want us to bring it back, and the amount of analysis that might be necessary. So, if it requires, for example, us to do a subsequent EIR, then that has a certain timeline and a certain cost. If, for example, council just wants us to look at these historic sites in more detail and weed them out a little bit more and then make a decision, and we don't need to do the CEQA, that has a certain timeline and a certain cost. So it all depends on the council direction.
Okay, thank you. Before I finish, I'm going to go ahead and, Bill Cranston, Commissioner Cranston, you had additional questions.
For us non-lawyers, what does this term of art mean? Is this something I need to be worried about?
Just means something that's got a definition.
Okay, if it's art, it doesn't have a definition?
It's all artless.
Okay. So, I guess the language in the precise plan says, at minimum, this will include the El Camino precise plan. In addition, identify at least one additional area consistent with AB 2339. That doesn't feel like art to me. Do you feel that that is vague in any way?
Oh, yeah, I'll defer to the city attorney.
So I'm going to avoid getting into a debate about whether or not it's vague or what the intent was when that language was drafted, but I'm going to try to help you understand how a court would look at it, because really where we're going here is the city at risk of being pulled into court and sued and for violating its housing element or some other law? And I will tell you that reading that language just cold, it is not clear from that language to me that that means the entire El Camino Real precise plan will be rezoned. It can certainly be read that way, but there is an argument that it could be read to mean that the precise plan will be amended in some way to allow emergency shelters by right. And there is a chance that a court could say, and typically courts do not read words into contracts or statutes or any other document that is not there in order to give it a particular meaning. To give it the meaning that, that I think, the public feels that it says, or whatever, it would have been clear to say, this will include rezoning the El Camino precise plan to allow emergency shelters by right in the entire precise plan. That's how you get absolute clarity. And we don't have that here. I'm like I said, I am not getting into the debate about what the original intent was. It may have been the intent of the city to do more. And if that is, the recommendation of this body, we will take that recommendation to council, and council will make, be able to make that decision. I just want to let you know that in a court of law, it may not be read that way because there is imprecision in the language. So if that helps you just understand how a court might look at it. But I am not trying to opine which is right or which is wrong, if that's helpful.
Helpful for you?
I heard what you're saying. Okay. Thanks.
Vice Chair Dempsey, you had an additional question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise this is not a legal question. Did we look at any other areas of Mountain View when we were trying to decide? I think somebody raised this question earlier from one of the speakers did. Where else did we look? And why did we choose El Camino Precise Plan?
So the way that AB 2339 is set up, it really is set up to say, start with the sites, right? Start with sites that can be, are where the existing use is not an impediment to the future location of an emergency shelter. I will say that we turned over lots and lots of rocks in our housing element sites inventory for sites where residential is allowed, where the existing use is not an impediment to future housing, just to satisfy our sites inventory, our housing sites inventory. Then on top of this, we have this emergency shelter. Fortunately, the emergency shelter requirement was only 6,400 square feet, so there were a few sites in the city that were not considered big enough to be viable residential sites for new housing developments or to give us very many housing units in our sites inventory. And in the housing element, we identified a vacant site, 860 Bay Street, as a site that met our obligations under AB 2339, was vacant, so we didn't have to make any, any determination around whether existing uses impede the creation of emergency shelter there, and all of the other characteristics that we were looking for: good access to transit, good access to services, good, all of these other expectations from AB 2339. So that site, which was effectively the best site in the city for meeting the requirements of AB 2339, was why we identified the El Camino Real Precise Plan in the housing element. Subsequently, after we adopted the housing element and started this work, we looked under more stones. We found other sites in the El Camino Real Precise Plan that could meet the criteria of existing use not being an impediment. And we found enough sites on El Camino Real that we felt we could bring forward El Camino Real alone. And if council wanted us to look at other areas, they could direct us to look at other areas. And of course, as we went through the process, we discovered all of these potential issues around historic resources and CEQA, and we had a lot of these discussions about what is the most defensible path moving forward, and that's why we narrowed down the sub area to bring forward to adopt by March 31st. So that was our process, and if the EPC wants to recommend that council direct us to look at more areas, we will look at more areas and bring back more opportunities. But we are doing what the El Camino Real what the housing element prescribed, with the additional finding of all of these complications around CEQA and historic resources and things like that came up late in the process.
Okay, so right now, the best candidate sites we have for building an emergency shelter, unpermitted, is right where you've got them in the staff report. It's the ones we've identified. That's
Yes.
That's where we're most likely to actually be able to build something.
Yes.
Is where you've pointed it out here.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I had just a couple of general questions, and this is for clarity. I think there's a lot of unknown for people in the public. I had to do this research myself to figure it out. It would be great if we could just have a very, very brief overview of the various types of shelters, because we talked about the Life Moves, the cold weather shelter, the interim shelter, emergency shelter, and I know Mr. Wayne had given a really brief definition of the difference between the interim and the emergency, but is there someone who could just go through really quickly the process of moving through the sort of various types of housing for the unhoused?
Yeah, I'm going to see if our housing director can start on that, and then we can jump in if necessary.
Thank you. So yes, I can start very briefly, and I think just to note that the housing department is really focused on the spectrum of housing, and we're currently in the process of working with the city manager's office with the human services division to develop a homeless response strategy. And so there will be study sessions to be held with council to talk about exactly these sorts of things and how we can have an integrated, intentional overall homeless response strategy. But the housing department is really focused on interim housing, and a lot of this is definitional. But interim housing that could be more flexibly programmed to allow clients and residents of different needs to have the services and different lengths of stay to help them stabilize, get supported, and transition onto other forms of housing, ideally permanent housing. And the permanent housing could be inclusive of services. Usually we refer to those units as rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, or they could be in a situation where they don't need the services, and that would just be more generally affordable housing. We don't touch too much on emergency shelters, but the length of stay is one of those items. And I believe there are different ways to operate emergency shelters. The ones that I'm more familiar with in other parts of the county have operations where folks can check in as evening approaches, and they'll have a place to stay during the night, and in the mornings they may have to leave the premises and be somewhere else, not at that location, and then spend their time elsewhere, whether it's looking for a job or whatever it may be. And then they would return at the end of the day to check back in. So that's one example of a type of emergency shelter that we hear about. But I think there are different models. They would be operated according to at least some very basic requirements that are in code. But those are the main ones that we in the housing department typically sort of hear about. It's the restrictions on the overall length of stay, and then what happens during the day, and how do folks sort of check in and check out. I'll turn it back over to Eric and Krisha in case they have any other sort of awareness of other kind of key operational considerations. I will also just note that we do provide some regional support to other projects, and I kind of took a look at it. I've heard them talked about in the context of emergency shelters, but they also appear to maybe be self-described as interim housing as well. And so some of this could be a little bit vague, and at the end of the day, it's sort of like how each development is being operated. But we have supported Ketzel House. I believe that's a Bill Wilson center, and there is one more here. Let me just double check. Oh, the Graduate House, which is another Life Moves project, and that it does appear to be described in a couple of different ways. That is more in the interim side, but I've also seen it talked about more on the emergency shelter side. So I don't want to opine too much about what is that Life Moves project, but I have seen it described a couple of different ways. And I think that does lend itself to a little bit of ambiguity in terms of what we call these things. In the homeless response strategy, part of where we would like to incorporate in the strategy is some clear definitions, clear buckets of what the spectrum of housing should include, or council may want us to think about including. And part of it is to clarify the approach and have a very clear intentional strategy for what should the continuum of housing, what should the spectrum include. So that was a little bit more long-winded, apologies for that, but that gives a little bit of hopefully some color in terms of the things that we are thinking about, and how there is a little bit of ambiguity sort of on this end of the spectrum, where emergency shelters begins to overlap with the concepts of transitional housing and begins to bleed into interim housing, then on the path to permanent housing.
Thank you. No, I think it's helpful just to understand, to lay out the framework. I think it's very helpful to the general public. I'm curious, when is the next time the council will see the homeless response strategy?
It will be the first time the council will be seeing it and discussing it in a public setting. It's a study session is being targeted for May 14th.
Okay. Thank you very much. And very quickly, just to confirm, a lot of the funding for these emergency shelters comes from county and state. Is that correct?
That's correct. The city, at least currently, does not have a funding source to contribute to the operations of shelters. We have provided capital funding, for example, for Hope's Corner that included fire sprinklers, ADA accessibility components such as curb cuts. And the city has provided in-kind resources such as parking to enable folks to drive to and park at the location. But there has been no funding for operations for shelters in Mountain View or similar types of operations. There was a one-time funding for Life Moves Mountain View interim housing, and that came from funding from another project through community benefits. But it was a one-time funding source, and whose purpose of that community benefit was targeted towards homeless response.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chen. I think if no one has any other questions, we'll just jump right into deliberation and then take action. Would anyone like to start? Commissioner Nunes.
Thanks, Chair Yin. This to me reads pretty clearly. What doesn't seem as clear is the impetus behind this proposed change, and I'm speaking with reference to the El Camino Precise Plan change. I'm not going to get into trying to understand that part, good faith, bad faith, noticing. We did have the housing element public outreach process. Every member in the community had an opportunity to participate, and I did see our staff work very diligently to ensure that they not only met the noticing requirements for the housing element, but honestly just went above and beyond, and I think did it in a way that is a model for other cities in our area to follow in terms of inclusivity and openness and bringing people into the housing element process. And so having said that, it's interesting to me. In terms of the term of art conversation, and I think that being in paragraph A, section 4 of AB 2339 around the zoning designation, I think that whether or not, and it sounds like we're still trying to figure that out. It sounds like there's still an open question around what that means and whether Google is being helpful or not. It sounds like it's just an unsettled question in terms of our legal brain trust right now. And so for me, the more instructive, and I don't know that you could call this a term of art, but the most instructive part of AB 2339 is the part that comes pretty much right after it says the people of the state of California do enact as follows. It says the housing element shall consist of. That's what it says. It says the housing element shall consist of. And in the housing element that we submitted to HCD, it says right there, it says amend the ordinance to allow emergency shelters by right consistent with AB 2339. That's in reference to that paragraph right there, section 4 of paragraph A. And it says, at minimum, this will include the El Camino Real Precise Plan. And that's in all caps, so that's a noun. That's a thing, we're referring to a thing. If you go to the website, our city's website, there's a page for the thing called the El Camino Precise Plan. There's a document titled the El Camino Precise Plan, which is the proper noun being used right here in our housing element that we submitted to HCD, which is something that, as we were informed by staff earlier, is something that we need to be adhering to. And so for me, there's, it seems pretty clear that for the reasons that our own attorneys, our city attorneys, our city legal brain trust still has an open question around this concern regarding legality of us implementing this change. And given that B, it seems like in this case, whatever the zoning designation is, seems to be what HCD has accepted in terms of the constituent parts of our housing element, aligning with that first sentence that the housing element shall consist of this. It seems like, it doesn't just seem like, it reads right there that this is what we've committed to. Not only did the members of the public have the opportunity to come out and engage in the housing element process, but we ourselves as commissioners bear a lot more responsibility in terms of what this document says, because we were appointed by the city council as the eyes, ears, and the ear to the ground of the public. We were appointed to review these documents, to raise these concerns, to put our names to this document. So if that is what the document says, and if this is what AB 2339 calls for, and if my name is on it, if our names are on it, Commissioner Donahue, I know that you're new, but hey, continuity, right? Stare decisis, terms of art. Another term of art that, honestly, this kind of reminds me of is Officer of the United States. It says right here, the El Camino Precise Plan. The housing element shall consist of. We don't need to get into this zoning designation situation and trying to parse those weeds as a commission. That's why it's an open question that our city attorneys are figuring out. The city council is going to be more informed than we are. So it seems that it would not be a responsible move for us to make, both from a committing to what we put our names to, not having the information to make the call. It is not appropriate, in my view, for us to move forward with recommending or accepting the staff recommendation regarding the El Camino Precise Plan. And I do not plan to vote for that recommendation, and I encourage my fellow commissioners to join me for those reasons.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dempsey, you're next. Oh, sorry, no, sorry. Commissioner Cranston's next.
So a couple of things. Some of you know that I have a business up in San Francisco. I come in the morning and it's not unusual for someone to have spent the night in front of my business. Most of the time I say, hey, we're opening up, can you start your day? And they're like, cool, they get up and they move on. There's a navigation center within a block of my business. There are low market rate housing areas, within, there's probably a couple thousand within a couple blocks of my business. And I don't have trouble with people who are in transition. I've come in the morning in the past, a guy would get out of his tent with a coat and tie, and he was going off to work because he'd lost his job, lost his housing, and he found a different job. And when he found his job, I was like, go, dude, okay? I'm troubled, and the police department's out there, they're not allowing these places to turn into drug dens, okay? They're cared for, the people that run these places know what they're doing, and they take care of them. And so I don't have the concern about, oh, it's an emergency center, and so it's gonna be all these horrible things. When I first moved to Mountain View, they wanted to put a low market rate housing development within a block of the crossings. It is one of the nicest buildings in the San Antonio area, and it continues to be today. So I don't have I'm not worried about the way these things are run, okay, number one. I think it's an alarmist view, quite frankly. And many of these people are good people who, for whatever reason, they can't afford a place to live, and they need a place to live. And this is a first stop, as Mr. Chen said, into transition and ultimately getting into housing. So that's number one. I'm not open to this idea of fear mongering on this. I don't know state judge legal challenges to the laws, but in my experience as more business law, and one of the things we always used was, what would a reasonable person understand? And as Commissioner Nunez said, the precise plan says in capital letters, the El Camino Precise Plan. That means something in Mountain View. It's clearly defined. It's not vague. You can, if you want to go after micro dissecting it, that's great. But my sense is the city council is not interested in spending a lot of legal hours going after nits. And if I were a judge and looked at this and said, okay, you said the El Camino Precise Plan, you have this document called the El Camino Precise Plan, that's what you signed up to do. We may not view the housing element as a contract, but we talked with hundreds and hundreds of people across the city as to what we wanted to be able to put in this. And it included people from all the areas. And maybe not everybody else views it as a contract, but I view the housing element as something we signed up as a city to do. And so I am perfectly okay with the alternative recommendation of permitting by right and doing the CEQA analysis, okay? Do the analysis. If it's something that goes past what one of the things we talked about was, what does this CEQA, is EIR mean? And it was a very different EIR than almost every EIR we've seen. So if this falls into that category of something different, we need something specific, okay, go do it. But we signed up to this, in my view. And I'm not worried about the locations. I think that's what we signed up to do, and that's what we need to stay with. I'm not really receptive to this micro area that's been proposed. So I will be supporting the alternative recommendation from staff.
Thank you. I think Vice Chair Dempsey is now up.
So I think it is beyond question that we probably do need a little bit more definitional clarity. And I think HCD's understanding of what the terms mean are going to be really important. It's not our job to, maybe we second guess a little time. I don't want to third guess the city attorney. I'm sure they'll reach out to HCD, or staff here will, and figure out what HCD thinks, right? But I think for me personally, the position that the city has taken thus far is reasonable given the lack of clarity over what exactly some of these terms mean. And again, I very much hope we're going to move with great speed to get real clear on what we think we've agreed to. Because I value very much a collaborative working relationship with HCD, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of those guys. Having said that, what I care most about is practicality. And my understanding of what staff has told me tonight is that the best options we have for actually building something, not just creating zones where there's theoretically we could do it, but there's nothing really that's going to happen. If the best options we actually have in real world to build these things, as Sacramento has told us to do, is right where we've put them now in this subzone, I'm okay with that, because that gets us kind of where we needed to be, right? If there were, let me be very clear, if there were some other really good options in other places that we have foreclosed because we've left them out of this, I would be very concerned. But practically speaking, if our best shot is exactly what you've told us it is, then I'm okay with going with what we have for now, with the caveat that we're going to look at other parts of El Camino Precise Plan if there's viable options, viable sites in there as well. So I think this should, I'm fine with this as sort of a starter, but I do think we should seriously look at letting it continue to expand as we find places where it's actually, maybe we could actually get something out of it. So I'm okay with going with the permutation of the way that staff has written it now, with sort of the caveats and the advice that I've asked for. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Commissioner Donahue?
I agree with much of what has already been said, but not all of it, of course, because they're conflicting in some ways. But I do agree that the emergency shelters are not going to turn into drug dens or anything like that. I mean, I'm really not concerned about that. And obviously, yes, people get kind of down on their luck, and they absolutely need housing. I mean, it's just a fundamental human right. That being said, I agree with Commissioner Dempsey that as it's current, so you're reading through 1.1F, it says amend the ordinance and or applicable precise plans to allow emergency shelters by right, consistent with AB 2339, which is seemingly somewhat vague. And this will include the El Camino Real Precise Plan. And tonight, Exhibit 3 has us amending the El Camino Real Precise Plan. So I think that, first of all, that technically satisfies the thing. But we don't just want to technically satisfy things. We want to go beyond that. And I think that the phased approach that was discussed earlier is a way to not just technically meet it, but to provide more potential emergency shelter sites. Of course, not every site will be developed into one, but and will meet not just the letter of the law, but really the spirit of the law. But with the March 31st deadline, I think we don't have time for CEQA analysis and things like that. So I am in favor of moving forward with this first phase and then having subsequent phases. I'm still very interested in that.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my turn now. Thank you for all you commissioners and your thoughts. It's really, I've taken it in, and my own personal take, I agree with a lot of what you had said. I don't believe that this site is going to be an issue, like a potential black mark on the population in the area. I don't think it's going to turn into some seedy place on El Camino. In fact, I think it is great that this area that's been pointed out is near a lot of services. I think that's just like everyone else who lives in Mountain View. We all want walkability. We all want, to be able to get to places and services easily. The legal technicality, I'm not going to get into. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I can read it both ways. I do hope, as Vice Chair Dempsey had said, that we can maybe reach out, get some clarification, because I too want to work well with HCD. I think in the spirit of what we've approved, that's part of it. We want to find out what their intentions are. I personally would like to see that we as a community, and I think we are, responding to the homeless issues, prevention, and taking steps towards getting people who are unhoused and for various reasons into housing eventually with services and help. I also feel like, as a commissioner looking at land use planning for things outside of housing, that is important too, and it's a factor. And so if we were getting applicants saying we want to build emergency shelters and we're turning them away, I would have a big issue. We don't have that. We're in fact with the staff recommendation saying that we have more than what is required for the land area needed with this particular site. So practically speaking, I feel like we have what we need. I do think that if we were to do the historic ordinance, take a look at that. You've already flagged 8. It's only 8. El Camino Real Precise Plan has a lot more structures. So I don't feel like, there's this flood of properties and lots that are going to be out of the question, given that staff has done due diligence looking at what properties are available for emergency shelters, and that this is it, then practically speaking, we've located the areas. And so I am comfortable moving forward with staff's recommendation with the caveat that we reach out to HCD, and also that we recommend to council that we do continue turning rocks over, because in the spirit of trying to deal with the homelessness issues, emergency shelters is the first step towards having people have a safe place. It's truly important, but because there's no wave knocking at our door right now, I think taking a slightly more cautious route is okay, because we have enough space for an emergency shelter should we need it immediately. That's where I am. So if anyone else has anything to continue. Commissioner Nunez.
Thanks, Chair Yin. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there is some agreement around this kind of more narrowing around the by right locations. Yeah, I mean, that, aside from how disappointing it feels to know that we have real words on a document that means something, that are objectively there. Putting that aside, I'm trying to process the kind of points being made around almost like increasing the viability, or it sounds like there is thought around, hey, staff has located some sites and we feel that this is going to be the areas where we're going to be able to actually have some of these emergency shelters. It sounds like that's some of the thinking. I'm trying to square that line of thought as well. One question that's coming to my head is if there aren't people banging the door down here saying, hey, I want to have this emergency shelter here, I want to have it, and yet we're narrowing the availability of area in that precise plan, presumably also, and probably substantially more, narrowing the actual number of people with a controlling stake in that land area who would have the ability to say, I want to have an emergency shelter in this area of the El Camino Precise Plan that I have control over. I'm trying to understand, how does shrinking and narrowing the availability of parcels, land, plotches, however you want to call it, on the one hand, like, how does that increase the likelihood that we're going to have what I'm hearing everyone acknowledge is a critical need for people who, for one reason or another, have no shelter? and also when it is a responsibility that we have towards our fellow people. I'm not able to square that. Maybe something's escaping me. But it also sounds like I do want to, also bring back that the impetus, from my understanding around some of this as well, at least from what I heard, is that some of this is around a conflict with council priorities around the historic ordinance and register. It doesn't sound like the impetus for this is, or at least I don't see a slide here where it says, hey, we identified these narrow targeted plotches of land, and these are the ones that are actually super viable. So we're proposing it here. We're narrowing the scope of what we've said. We're proposing that we do that. I don't see that slide. I don't see the slide that says that that's what it's about. I see the slide that says competing council priorities, historic ordinance. So if it's the case that our conflict, our city council conflict is driving some of this reanalysis, or at least the stated reasons for why we're looking at this reanalysis, I mean, everyone reports to someone, right? Like, we report to the state. When we conflict with the state, it's not up to us to say, well, we're going to go back on something that we committed to you, and also that we put our names to. That's not how hierarchy works. That's not how federalism works. It's up to us to say, oh man, we committed to that already. We're going to have to go figure out what we're going to do with our council priorities. We're going to have to figure it out and readjust on our end, not go back on something that we objectively wrote in real words in documents that we all put our names to, that everyone in the community had an opportunity to participate in, to solve for. And I will take issue with what Ms. Cashin said earlier when she said, hey, I was displaced and now indirectly in Life Moves. No, it was directly. It is a direct cause. I've spoken to Ms. Cashin. I know that if it wasn't for our displacement policy or lack thereof, that now SB 330 is solving for, she would have been able to continue paying her rent steadily and still been housed today. So it is the cause of our failure to develop housing, to build it. And when we put our names to something saying, hey, this is what we're committing to, and now we're going back on it, and we're saying that we're doing it in a way that is narrowing the scope because we're actually going to be able to have more viable paths to these shelters, when the impetus for that is our own internal conflict around council priorities. How do we square that? How can we actually say, hey, housing is a human right, housing is XYZ, but also let's just kind of like have that be a right here? How are we doing that? I'm not necessarily saying you guys have to explain it to me. I can, process that on my own, but I think that's an open question that at least the public ought to consider as well.
I'll just give my 2 cents, I suppose. I guess what I was thinking was, I feel like we are doing what the housing element has asked. Practically speaking, we have enough room and enough space for what they're asking us to provide for emergency shelters. I think that, in an ideal world, everything happens in the city in perfect timing, but it doesn't always occur that way. Given that, this is just one aspect. Okay, we'll just take the historic portion. If we're doing the historic ordinance, we're working on it, they've already flagged 8. If we were to go ahead, and no one's knocking on the door saying, let's build it right now somewhere else on El Camino because nothing else seems to be viable. in an imaginary world, if it were, then an emergency shelter would be able to be put on there by right, correct? Since that's not happening, it's fine, but it gives the city a chance to at least not have that happen. So it's being a little bit more conservative in that sort of potential. So if we have enough, according to the housing element, and we'll look at the definition of the zoning designation, it's not necessarily a narrowing, practically speaking, right now. It gives the city time and council enough information, hopefully, to then make a determination about the historic aspect. Maybe those 8 can be saved. But it doesn't take away, practically, from the ability for emergency shelters to be built. So, to me, it's just kind of like a timing issue and also a definition issue. I feel like if we're serving the definition, then council has the ability to have more information and time to do what they need to do outside of the housing issue and then make decisions based on that. If it is very quick and easily answered.
Quick clarifying question. On slide 9, the minimum 6,400 square feet required component, is that part of AB 2339, or is that part of some other like housing element component? Like, where does that number come from?
That's direct from AB 2339.
Okay, perfect. So I'll pause it here. I'll throw out for consideration with regards to us meeting more than is required by AB 2339. If we wanted to meet more than what was required by AB 2339, then as part of the housing element process and our deliberations and staff's work and all our collective orchestra of coming together as a community to produce this document, we would have said, and we will provide sites constituting more than the 6,400 XYZ number required by AB 2339. But that is not what we said. We said, at minimum, it will include the El Camino Precise Plan. That is what we said. That is what is in the document. And now we're changing it. That is what is happening.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to deliberate? Should we go ahead and make a motion? Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Cranston.
So as I read 2339, what it was, it actually addressed what the very first public speaker said was make emergency shelters available in residential areas. Today they're not. Is this the staff recommendation enough? It's the bare minimum. Is that what we stand for as a city? I don't think that's where we are. So I understand what my fellow commissioners have said. I think the intent of 2339 was the right thing, but I also think we need to do the right thing in our own conscience, and so that's guiding my view of this. Is doing the bare minimum is not what my conscience is comfortable with.
Thank you. If there are no more deliberations, would someone like to make a motion? Then I suppose I do, if no one else does. Is that usually how it goes? Let's see, is it up on the... I'll recommend the City Council adopt an ordinance, City of Mountain View, amending Chapter 36 zoning. Oh, sorry, there's a screen over my words here. Zoning of the City Code, amending the development standards and permitting process for emergency shelters, and finding the amendment to be categorically exempt under Section 15061B3 of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, to be read in title only, with a modification to remove amendments to Section 36.20.05 regarding permit processes in the General Industrial Zoning District, Exhibit 2 to the EPC staff report. And also, I believe there's a, thank you. Number 3, recommend the City Council adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Mountain View amending the El Camino P38 precise plan to add emergency shelters as a permitted use and to include permitting process for shelters consistent with the Housing Element Program 1.1F, and finding the amendment to be categorically exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, pursuant to the CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, to be read in title only. Further, reading waived, Exhibit 3 to the EPC staff report. I believe we need a second. If that is to move forward, does anyone want to second the motion? Second by Vice Chair Dempsey. I think we'll move to a vote.
The motion passes with 3 votes for yes and 2 votes for no, and 2 recused.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind bringing back the 2 commissioners who are recused. Commissioners Clark and Gutierrez have rejoined the commission, and we will then now, as a commission, discuss, deliberate, and vote on the remainder of item 5.1, which would be staff recommendation number 1. Does anyone have any questions regarding that portion? Go ahead, Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of small questions, actually. Can we start with the slides? There was something on the slides I wanted to ask about. Specifically, page 3. Let me see if they're the right ones. I think we're talking about the numbers of permits. There we go. So the question I wanted to ask, and really I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this right. When I'm looking at total RENA allocation, we got an 8-year cycle. For very low, low, and moderate, we're not on track to make 100% at the end of 8 years, are we?
No, we're not.
Okay. I know it's first year, but my hope is that we track that. What's the right way to put it? I know we're tracking it. I hope we talk about that. I think, it's first year, it's early returns, we can be patient, but maybe by the end of the second year, if that's not changing, my hope is that we will have a fulsome conversation about if we're not getting there, why aren't we getting there, and what else should we think about doing? Again, early returns, but it jumped out to me that, and we're sure as heck above above moderate. So we're doing good there, no surprise. I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody. But my hope is that we come back. If it's not tracking towards success, I hope we have more deeper conversations about what else we could do. So that was one piece. Where was that other page? Oh, this is a silly one. We're talking about subsidized units a couple slides after this. We had 199. Do you remember the page, Krisha? So are we legally required to have 200? Did I read that right? I could have sworn I saw something in the staff report that said we had to have 200. And we had
there is a target. I don't recall. I'm going to defer to the housing director on that because it's one of his programs.
But it's not binding, I guess is the question. I just asked because I don't want us to be caught up in technical non-compliance, even though we're pretty much there.
Thanks for the question. Yes, the 200 target units came from our Measure A memorandum of understanding with the county to fund a portfolio of projects that includes up to 200 units of permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. So that was a target goal that we had created with the county, and that came out of our initial 5-year affordable housing strategy from a few years ago. So that was a target that we were trying to hit, but it's not a state target or anything like that.
So nothing bad could happen. In fact, that means you pretty much nailed it.
That's correct.
Boom. Okay. I may have a couple more, but I can stop for now.
I don't see any other commissioners wanting to ask questions, so you can go ahead and ask away. Oh, sorry, actually, Chris, Commissioner Clark has a question.
I was going to make a motion. So
okay, please.
I'll stop.
You sure? Okay. Commissioner Clark, you made a motion? You wanted to make a motion?
Yeah, so I'll move that we recommend the City Council consider the 2023 Annual Progress Report 2023 through 31 Housing Element Exhibit 1 of the EPC staff report as drafted.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Cranston will second that. And let's take it to a vote.
This motion passes with 6 votes for yes and 1 vote for no.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll close agenda item 5 and move to new business. Item 6.1, the 2023 General Plan Annual Progress Report. We have a staff presentation from Assistant Planner Vincent Kwan and Principal Planner Diana Pancholi.
Good evening, Commissioners. Vincent Kwan, Assistant Planner, and I'm joined by Principal Planner Diana Pancholi. Tonight, we are presenting the Annual Progress Report of the City's General Plan Action Plan. In 2012, the City Council adopted the 2030 General Plan and the related General Plan Action Plan. The 2030 General Plan Action Plan is a list of action items that carry out the General Plan's goals and policies. These action items include programs, plans, studies, ordinance updates, and other measures. The EPC is responsible for the annual review of the General Plan Action Plan in the form of an annual progress report, and for monitoring the progress the city is making in implementing the general plan. This year, staff has provided 4 tables for general plan action items for the EPC's review. Table 1 includes items which have not yet started, are currently in progress, or were completed during 2023. Table 2 includes items which were completed prior to 2023. Table 3 includes items which are achieved through day-to-day operations, practices, and policies. Table 4 includes items which have been discontinued because of state law or other city council prioritizations. Since the previous general plan action item update, 6 items have been completed in 2023. These include actions related to village centers. In January 2023, City Council adopted zoning and precise plan amendments to allow mixed-use village centers consistent with general plan policy direction and land use designations. The next completed item was the telecommunication implementation plan. Since 2014, adopted precise plans North Bayshore, El Camino, San Antonio, and East Wisman have all identified standards to provide utility easements behind the public right-of-way in order to accommodate various utilities. This includes telecommunication services in areas which are limited in space on streets or sidewalks. These standards are applied to all subdivisions in the city. Further, in December 2022, staff implemented a new microtrenching standards detail for fiber telecommunication lines installed at shallow depth and narrow width to minimize impacts to the public right-of-way and other utilities. The next item is related to residential solar photovoltaic systems. The city publishes information about incentives and rebates for a variety of home upgrades, including solar PV systems, on the city website. The 2 other items are for non-residential solar photovoltaic systems. The city adopted the 2022 Energy Reach Codes to support the installation of solar PV systems on non-residential buildings and parking lots. Similarly, the city publishes information regarding incentives and rebates, which includes non-residential upgrades on the city website. This includes solar PV, technical assistance, and outreach programs from other organizations such as the Silicon Valley Clean Energy and the Bay Area Regional Energy Network. Lastly, the solar PV systems on municipal buildings. The solar feasibility analysis was completed in 2018. City staff is tracking the Inflation Reduction Act and other possible funding options to identify cost-effective ways to install solar PV on municipal buildings. In addition, staff has submitted interconnection applications to PG&E for future installation of solar PV on city-owned buildings. In addition to the mentioned completed items, there are ongoing efforts by staff to help implement action items. Some key efforts included are the Transportation Demand Management, or TDM ordinance, 2 new precise plans, and the R3 zoning district updates. For TDM ordinance, staff continues to refine standard TDM conditions for development projects. Public Works Department continues to work with a consultant to develop a citywide TDM ordinance that will improve consistency, which includes refining the reporting requirements after the adoption of the citywide ordinance. The city is also working on the Downtown Precise Plan Comprehensive Update and a new Precise Plan for Moffett Boulevard. Both started in late 2023. The Moffett Boulevard Precise Plan is intended to implement the general plan change area policies, as well as other land use policies. In addition, the city also has ongoing efforts to update the R3 zoning development standards. This includes reviewing and updating standards related to parking and TDM, neighborhood transitions, mix of uses, transit-oriented development, and other actions in the action plan. The anticipated implementation timing for the TDM ordinance, precise plans, and R3 zoning district is 1 to 3 years. Lastly, 10 action items from the greenhouse gas reduction program have been discontinued due to priority changes in recent sustainability action plans and other work plans. These have all been listed in the staff report and in Table 4. Following a recommendation from the EPC, the General Plan Annual Progress Report is scheduled to be presented to City Council on March 26, 2024, and shortly thereafter forwarded on to the California Office of Planning and Research. In conclusion, staff recommends that the EPC review and recommend City Council consider the 2023 General Plan Annual Progress Report. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any commissioners' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Cranston.
So I guess I'm okay with the report. I like the discontinued items list. If I have one request, it would be that council consider asking the city manager to look at the items that have not yet been started and are past the 10-year window that they were listed for, and determine if those items are any longer a priority and they should move to the discontinued list. Because if it's, certainly some of them may have been delayed as a result of COVID, but it seems to me that we're past 10 years, and it would probably make, if the city manager come back and say, these don't seem to be priorities anymore, maybe we should take them off the list, I would feel better about the list rather than saying they're just hanging around and we're not going to do them. So that would be my only side request.
Mr. Dempsey.
Like Commissioner Cranston, I too have a question about, or a request really, about the discontinued list, which I'm totally fine with from a policy standpoint, but in almost all of these, you don't say why you discontinued it. It just says it's no longer a priority or something like that. And I go through and I annotate these when I read them, and after every single one, I was like, why? And it may be obvious to folks on the inside, and maybe even obvious to council, but I think for maybe the public, when the public's reading this, it would be helpful just to have one sentence that says that technology is outdated, or council changed the priorities, or we didn't have money for it, or whatever it happens to be. I'm fine with whatever the answer is, but just one sentence for each one about why it got cut, that would be really helpful to me, and I think better for the public.
Any others? I'll reiterate what Vice Chair Dempsey had said. Yeah. And I think this is just like maybe bookkeeping stuff. I believe table 3 didn't delete the discontinued items. Measure E14 and E15, they're still there. So seeing no other questions, deliberations, I'm going to ask if there's public comment. Thank you. Public comment.
There are no public comments.
Thank you. So seeing that, we can now move. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yeah, deliberations, right? So,
yes.
And I think we passed that option for 5.1. We just went straight to the vote, but maybe I missed it, and if I did, no worries. On this front, though, I agree with what Commissioner Dempsey had mentioned, along with the previous comments by the commissioners. I think one thing you should expect from me in general is that I want to move from good to great. I was accustomed to doing that with the Mountain View Wisconsin School District Board of Trustees, and I want to bring that attitude, and I have while I've been here with the EPC. And I think the recommendations that you make, sir, are great, because that's how we can improve, one, transparency with the community, and two, efficiency with our train of thoughts and the rationale as to why we do things at city government level. If we're able to dedicate our time to put in another minute or two per response to indicate why it is that we're doing things or removing things, in general, the community will appreciate that even more. The distrust will then lessen and will be more effective. If we keep to what we say and we promise when we write a document that's looked at by the city, our local government, and the state capital, we need to heed those words as truth. If we don't, we lose credibility, and then we open ourselves up to legal liability issues. That's one thing that I'd like to avoid. Thank you.
Okay. So deliberations are at a close, I take it? I will ask for any movers. Commissioner Cranston? And a seconder? Commissioner Nunes? Thank you. Does it have to be read? I think so. I believe it has to be read.
So I move that the City Council consider the 2023 General Plan Annual Progress Report, Exhibit 1 to the staff report.
All right. Now we'll have the EPC vote.
This motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. Item 6.1 closes, and we are now at 6.2, the EPC Chair and Vice Chair elections. We are going to, well, I will open the session for nominations for Chair. If there are none right now, I will go ahead. Oh, no, I see. Commissioner Nunes.
I'd like to nominate Vice Chair Dempsey to chair, not just as our most tenured member of the commission, but also consequently as our most experienced, and bringing a wealth of experience in terms of his ability to work with others, and also think in a constructive manner with regards to the city's position against some of these issues, the risks involved, and always seeking to bring more community engagement and involvement, and make sure that people are folded into the process instead of left out. So I will nominate Vice Chair Dempsey.
Okay. Well, I don't believe we need a second, but I will go ahead and ask if you would be willing to take upon this position of chair.
I would be honored to, Madam Chair. And if I may, I just want to thank Commissioner Nunez. That was very kind of you, sir. Thank you. It meant a lot.
Just a quick question, if there are any other nominations? Seeing none, no? Then we will go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Do we need to take public comment
on this? Oh, how about that? Public comment.
We typically
Thank
do.
you, Commissioner Clark. Okay. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. ABC Clerk, do you see any?
There are no public commenters.
Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and take the vote by roll call.
So, Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston?
Aye.
Commissioner Donahue?
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Aye.
Commissioner Nunes?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey?
Recuse.
Chair Yin?
A resounding yes.
The motion passes unanimously with 6 votes yes and 1 recused.
Thank you very much. And we are going to do the same. We're going to open nominations for vice chair. Oh, that is a good question. We will ask staff. That is a question. That in our normal rotation of tenure, who would be up next?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Gutierrez to the position of Vice Chair.
I believe that's correct.
I believe Commissioner Gutierrez and Commissioner Nunez started at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
He started a month before. He was appointed before
yes.
the term of
That's
Ali's
correct.
term, and then Commissioner Gutierrez joined at the end of it, so the most tenured members.
I'm consciously making my nomination.
Understood.
Yeah, I mean, Commissioner Gutierrez just articulated a vision of good to great. He brings a perspective and also more experience from having served on an elected body, a deliberative body. Between himself and Chair Dempsey, I think we're going to have a collaborative commission, a strong commission, and so, in credence to that experience, I am consciously making my nomination for Commissioner Gutierrez if he, kindly accept it, or if he so chooses. I'm happy to make that nomination.
Thank you. A seconder is not necessary, but I will second. I would like to ask if you'd be willing to accept the vice chair position.
Yes, but I adhere to tradition. So are you sure, Alex?
A billion %, 100%.
Thank you for the kind words.
Absolutely.
And I'm surprised and I'm happy at the same time, and I will do my best. So thank you.
If there are any other nominations for vice chair, please let it be known now. Seeing none, we will move to roll call vote.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Just a minute, just public comment.
Again, public comment. All right, thank you very much. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on the phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6.
There are no public comments.
Thank you very much. We will now take the EPC vote.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston?
Aye.
Commissioner Donahue?
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Recuse.
Commissioner Nunez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey?
Aye.
Chair Yin?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with 1 recuse.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Chair and Vice Chair. Okay, this is my last agenda item. I would like to open the Commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the Commission at this time. I believe, Diana, you have something to update us with.
Thank you, Chair. Diana Pancholi, Principal Planner with the Planning Division. Just a quick announcement about a special EPC meeting that is coming up on March 13th. And I know we have received a few requests about the upcoming agendas, so just wanted to inform everybody that staff will be bringing forward R3 zoning updates for that special meeting. So our next EPC meeting will be held on March 13th.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners who would like to chime in with updates or, yes, Vice Chair Dempsey?
I'll defer to Commissioner Cranston.
I just wanted to thank former Chair Ian for her service in the last year, for trying to corral the cats here and keep us on track as best possible. So thank you for putting up with us for the last year, and look forward to giving you the seat.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for your patience and support in watching me climb the learning curve. It was an honor and a privilege, and I look forward to being commissioner again. I would also like to welcome new Commissioner Donahue to the group. I look forward to working with you. So far, I feel like, you bring a lot of insight, and with all your experience on the various boards, I think you'll be a great asset to the team. No more from other commissioners? Then we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting at, I believe it is 9:32 p.m. Thank you, everyone.